When you think of classic wrestling video games, there are certainly a few different titles that come to mind. Smackdown vs. Raw 2006 or 2007, WWF No Mercy, WWE 2K14, and Smackdown Shut Your Mouth are just a handful of titles that are looked back in a fond light. However, Smackdown Here Comes the Pain certainly makes an argument as one of the most beloved wrestling games of all time. Released on October 27, 2003 in the United States, the final wrestling game boasting the Smackdown title would offer a timeless classic, equipped with a memorable roster and fun gameplay to keep you busy for hours on end. With all of the positives this game holds, there is still an inescapable drawback that nearly every wrestling game possesses: the beloved stars that did not make it into the game. In this video, we're going to take a look at a handful of deserving wrestlers who did not make it into the game for one reason or another. Some of these guys were with the company throughout development, some left halfway through, some were injured, and others were intended to be in the game but ultimately got scrapped. Due to the nature of the year-round marathon that professional wrestling operates on, it's nearly impossible to get everyone included into the game. There is no off-season, no official start date for the WWE calendar, and the roster is ever-changing. Whether it be due to contract disputes, injuries, or disciplinary reasons, there's always a consistent shuffle of stars. This game did not have a lot of drawbacks, and most of the omissions were totally justified. Regardless, that didn't keep fans and players from wishing some of these guys made it into the game. Let's get started. Jeff Hardy. One of the most talked about omissions from this game is Jeff Hardy, one of the most popular wrestlers in the first decade of the 2000s. Jeff Hardy had established himself as an incredible tag team worker by this time, creating a plethora of memorable moments that would be relayed countless times after. When the Hardy Boys were separated for the first time, the two began their first stints as solo competitors in 2002. Jeff Hardy certainly had his share of big moments, like his unforgettable ladder match against The Undertaker for the WWE Championship, or the match against Rob Van Dam in which the Intercontinental and European Championships were unified. During the year of 2002 and the build into the new year, he made some very memorable moments and continued his terrific relationship with fans. Come 2003, his direction was much more up in the air, as he was bouncing around between insignificant angles. Jeff ultimately struggled to stay in favor of his employer as the year went on, and on April 22, 2003, Jeff Hardy was released from his WWE contract, a consequence of no-showing events paired with a supposed drop in in-ring performance. Jeff Hardy's personal plights at this point in his career are well documented and not the aim of this video, so we won't be going too deep into them here. WWE games that release in the fall tend to have a general roster cut off of WrestleMania, and it wasn't uncommon to see a wrestler make it into the game who was no longer with the company by the time the game was released, though Jeff Hardy would not be one of those occurrences despite being around the company when the roster was largely being determined and even a part of the beta version of the game. During his absence, Jeff Hardy would spend time on the independent scene as well as a stint in Ring of Honor before ultimately signing to TNA in 2004, and he would not return to the WWE until 2006. The games in the Smackdown title series were great at providing players with templates to easily create popular stars that didn't make the cut. But it's not just the same as the real thing, equipped with authentic animations, entrance music, and even Titantrons. William Regal. William Regal is another name on this list who originally had data into the game, but was ultimately scrapped during some time development. William Regal had become one of the most beloved mid-card acts in the Ruthless Aggression Era, largely due to his character work during his stint in the 21st century, though Regal was also one of the most capable competitors in the company. William Regal spent most of 2002 capturing singles accolades like the Intercontinental and European Championships while aligning with the Un-Americans, and in 2003, he would even become World Tag Team Champion alongside Lance Storm, and all signs pointed to an inclusion into the main WWE game franchise. However, No Way Out 2003 would end up being Regal's last match of the year. Serious health issues in addition to a concussion he sustained during that tag team title match would keep him on the sidelines for the duration of 2003 and even into 2004, while his absence on television for nearly an entire year explains his exclusion from Here Comes the Pain. In my opinion, I feel like keeping William Regal included into the in-game roster would have been an admirable act to acknowledge a worker who unwaveringly put their body on the line for their employer and was also dealing with some major health concerns. Thankfully, William Regal would recover and make his return to the WWE, where he would begin his memorable stint with Eugene, and he would deservedly go on to make the majority of wrestling games that followed Here Comes the Pain. Side note here, but No Way Out 2003 is a serious testament to Regal's toughness, as he was legitimately knocked out during the match, but managed to be the one to score the pinfall even while concussed. Hulk Hogan. William Regal wasn't the only wrestler to take part in No Way Out 2003 and not make it onto the Here Comes the Pain roster, as one of the men who main evented the show would also be out of the WWE before the game was released. That's right, the Hulkster would not be featured in the game or even employed by the company by the time Here Comes the Pain was released. Hulk Hogan had left WWE by mid-summer and made his last appearance on WWE television as Mr. America during this stint in late June. Now, just because someone is not employed with the WWE, that does not mean that they aren't going to be in the upcoming game. For example, Kevin Nash was let go from the company in August of 2003, but was still featured in Smackdown Here Comes the Pain. Following a monumental clash at No Way Out with The Rock, Hulk Hogan would go on to defeat Vince McMahon at WrestleMania 19 in a match that was proclaimed as 20 years in the making. Following this string of huge matches, the Hulkster then began his run as Mr. America, a masked persona that came about after Hogan was forced to sit out the rest of his contract in canon. Mr. America would be heavily featured on SmackDown, accompanied by a Judgment Day victory over Rowdy Roddy Piper, though his time on screen would last less than 2 months. The storyline would fall apart after Hogan was revealed as the character, and he would leave the WWE a week after his identity was exposed. Given reports that Hulk Hogan left the WWE at this time due to frustrations with the creative direction of his character, there's reason to believe his exclusion is due to the animosity between Hogan and the company, as he not only was a part of the beta version of the game and then removed, but would be absent from any and all WWE games until SmackDown vs. Raw 2006. Nowadays, Hulk Hogan has lost some serious favor with the fans, and rightfully so. But back in this time period, the absence of the Hulkster was definitely noticed. The APA. While the previously mentioned names on this list are fairly clear as to why the character, or in this case characters, didn't make it into the game, the case for the APA, Bradshaw and Ron Simmons, is a bit more hazy, as they were technically employed with the company during the entire duration of the development of Here Comes the Pain. Following a separation via the 2002 WWE Draft, the Acolytes Protection Agency had reunited once again and captured Tag Team Gold. However, the catch is the reunification came about in Ohio Valley Wrestling, WWE's developmental territory at the time, and not the main WWE roster. Bradshaw and Ron Simmons would make their returns to SmackDown in June of 2003, where they would be featured as formidable contenders for the WWE Tag Team Championships throughout the year, though they would never recapture the gold in this stint. During their time spent as singles competitors after the 2002 draft, Bradshaw would spend a great deal of his time claiming and then subsequently dropping the Hardcore Championship, winning and losing the championship over 15 times during this period. Ron Simmons dropped the Farouk name and was used very sparingly on SmackDown during this time, with his most prominent and significant work coming alongside Reverend Devon as they would compete in a tag team title tournament for the then new WWE Tag Team Championships. Ron Simmons didn't have much to do over on the Blue brand, and Bradshaw would be put on the shelf for about 6 months after sustaining an injury in late 2002. Given the path that these two had been on, it's not hard to see why they did not get the nod of approval to be a part of the game. Usually, whenever low-card workers are not included into the game, nobody would bat an eye. For example, Al Snow, Billy Gunn, and Paul London are a few other names that did not make the in-game roster despite being employed with the company at the time. However, the Acolytes Protection Agency had been a household name for quite a while, being included in many games prior and memorable fan favorites, although the writing maybe was on the wall when they were both excluded from WrestleMania 19, the game released on September 8, 2003, and Farouk was not included into the Raw 2 video game either, which was released on September 15th of the same year, just a week later. These two were included in SmackDown Shut Your Mouth, making it the final game that the Acolytes were packaged together as active superstars. Gail Kim. Gail Kim is a notorious name in the history of women's wrestling, as she was incredibly talented in the ring and was one of the women who could go in the ring opposed to relying on physical attraction to get her over. Gail Kim's most successful and memorable tenure could be argued to have occurred during her time in TNA, however she did have two different stints in the WWE. Her first stint, beginning in the summer of 2003, would start off with a bang as she would capture the WWE Women's Championship on the June 30th edition of Monday Night Raw after emerging victorious in a battle royal. Gail Kim would make history with this victory as she became the first competitor to win the Women's Championship in their WWE debut. Her title defense would span just 4 weeks, and while this wasn't a significant reign in the grand scheme of things, I say this is enough to justify her spot on the in-game roster of the upcoming game that would be released in October of that year. While she did miss the cutoff by a considerable margin, she would be consistently featured in the women's division following her debut in the summer of 2003, all the way until she would be taken out of action in November of that year due to a broken collarbone. This entry is not as much of a legitimate case of inclusion, but more so a perfect scenario of someone who, quote, deserved an appearance. Gail Kim came into the WWE far too late as the roster had already been determined at the time, and the developments were underway with the company looking towards a release less than 4 months after Gail Kim made her first in-ring appearance. But still, I think she should have got in. Honorable mention: Ultimate Warrior. An enigmatic name that was close to being included into Smackdown Here Comes the Pain, but was ultimately scrapped. While the Ultimate Warrior hadn't made any recent appearances on WWE programming at the time, based on the evidence found online, there were concrete plans to include Warrior into the game, as he is one of the multiple in-game models that would be created, but would not actually make it into the game. James Hellwig was not under contract with the WWE anywhere around this time period, but it was confirmed by IGN in an interview with THQ that he was slated to be a part of the Legends roster in the game. However, whether Warrior was asking too much money for his likeness or backlash from public speaking events around this time came to light, reported failed negotiations would ultimately keep Warrior out of the game and change the plans. So there you have it. What do you think? These are only a handful of names who didn't make it. There are a number of wrestlers who have some of their data in the game, but a character model was never made for. Let me know any stars you wanted to see in this game down below in the comments. Shout out to those subscribed to the Real 1 tier on Patreon. You guys are awesome, and your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you to the other Patreon members, and thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next video. Take it easy.